Welcome to Command Shift Left, the podcast that helps you navigate the treacherous waters of the software development, ops, and security world while also diving into the hot current trends in the industry. Join myself, developer Philip, our co-host or Vice.
Hey audience!
As we battle through hilarious real-world stories, pro tips and hacks for navigating your way around developer security, learning about our Shift Left life, and life stories that have saved our ass.
We have two awesome guests with us today, Francesco and Anand. It's fantastic to have you here. Thanks for taking time to join us on this podcast. And with no particular order, let's find out a little bit more about you guys. So maybe Anand, you can kick us off and tell us who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so I'm Anand, co-founder and CPO at Bito, which is a game-changing productivity tool for developers. We started this about 2 years ago. And, moved to using AI to, help developers about a year back. You know how the startup world is, you cannot pivot all the time. And prior to that, was fortunate to work with a good team and take a startup Pragmatic, which is an, programmatic advertising public in 2020. And then
Awesome.
Sold IOTA, where I was the CPO to DNB. And prior to that, have been working in operating systems and high-performance computing with Veritas and Panta Systems.
Sounds amazing. Well, thanks for joining us today. And Francesco, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thank you so much for pronouncing my name in the correct way. So, hi, I'm Francesco from Rome. I'm a developer advocate at Dev, Docker captain, public speaker. I do stuff on mostly Twitter and YouTube. I also have my own podcast, but it's great to be here as a guest. Thank you so much, Philip, for inviting me. And let's just get started. Thank you.
Awesome. So this is a great time to start, and let's kick off with our first fact for today, and that fact is by you, Or. So take it away.
Thanks, Philip. So my fact for this episode is that the game Quake III Arena contributed to the world one of the fastest estimation for functions to calculate an inverse square root. The calculation itself is in the form of subtraction from a magic number. That magic number, which is kind of well known today for across the graphics space, is 0x 5f 3759df. And I find this thing very, very exciting because it's a small thing that an engineer kind of plugs into their code, and it becomes a phenomenon. It becomes something that affects the entire development world. It affects the entire gaming world in the way we think about optimizing and building these usually complex mathematical things. Initially, when it was when it became known to the world, it was thought that it was just the engineer that came up with it on their own. By the way, the engineer that deserves the credit here is Greg Walsh, who was part of a company that worked on Quake III Arena. And initially it was thought that it was just an engineer that thought of this on their own, but actually it turns out that it was someone in academia that worked on something that he derived from their work. He derived the mathematical shtick here. But still, it's something that an engineer just plugged into code and something that looks very outwardly, and it changed the entire industry. And I wonder how many of us as engineers, when we're writing code, when we are working just on our projects, how many things that we're doing maybe are world-changing or game-changing, and we're not even aware of it. We're just thinking, oh, this is just a short heuristic or a shortcut that I'm taking here, but it has tremendous effects. And how many of these things are still hidden? They're just in your code that you wrote for some company, but it hasn't become public knowledge. So I wonder what you folks think about that.
I'm actually wondering, was this an accident? Were they just trying to find a solution, and by accident they came up with a calculation that happens and is able to calculate the square root so fast, or was it something that they deliberately planned and they knew the exact execution of it?
So I wouldn't say it's an accident, but I do think there's serendipity here. So the engineer was working on building the graphic engine for this game, and you needed to get the right frame rate, the right pace out of that engine. And if you just write it naively, it doesn't work out of the box. So he had to apply some optimizations. And finding these hacks that are estimations and not the full calculations are the ways that, like, these heuristics essentially are the ways that engineers often solve these problems. So instead of like putting in the perfect mathematical thing, you find like a magic number essentially that get everything to work very, very efficiently. So it wasn't an accident. It was something that was intended, but I don't think when they were working on it, they were realizing how far spread the effect would be.
This is interesting because, if you basically use floating point numbers to do the same thing, it's going to consume a lot of amount of CPU power. So these kind of like hacks, although kind of like, looks very simple once you know about them, but, have a big performance impact when, you're actually developing a game. If you're playing Quake, you don't want to kind of like buffer when you're kind of turning around and shooting. So yeah, pretty cool.
So first of all, if you don't know what Quake 3 is, it means that you are young. So just check it out on Google. So welcome, you are young. It means that you are young. I was playing Quake 3 when I was in my high school. I also won a tournament, but that's another story. I also made my thesis on Doom and Quake 3, so I came prepared. And Quake 3 is basically, it was the first game with a client-side architecture. It was a first very well done multiplayer game. It's a use case use study. So I don't know exactly about this thing, but probably if you implement this improvement in the implementation of course on the web, on the internet, this I think one of the reasons why it was a success when we had way lesser bandwidth and of course way less powerful computers. So I think I didn't know about this fact, but I know about this client-side architecture thing that now we give them for granted. It's a client-side architecture, but I think in the 90s it was absolutely not. For Doom online, it was a mess because they was trying to elaborate everything on the local machine, and when you need to synchronize, it's a nightmare. So probably this is one of the reasons why when you go on a multiplayer scale and on the web, it can be game-changing. And I think the secret is to never give your code for granted. So maybe, and this was something that, when you have like some extra time as a developer to improve your code, and the managers think that you're just wasting time. But if you really want to improve the code, that extra time, it's really meaningful. So this is a good case, and now I know something else. Today I learned TIL.
Okay. Another cool thing about this is the comments that are... So later the code was open sourced, and so we have the actual comments from the code itself, and it seems that the comments were added by another engineer reviewing the code and not the original engineer. And so there's a line where they, you can, by the way, everyone can find this on Wikipedia if you want to see it. Obviously, I can't give you the visual picture over the podcast. But there's one line where they're casting the floating point into a long integer. And that the comment for that line is evil floating point bit level hacking. And then the second line is where the actual magic number appears. And it's there's a shift and then a subtraction from it, and the comment for that line is literally "what the fuck?" ?
Which just means he probably approved, right?
In the end of the day, that code made it into the game. So yeah, it was merged in. If you can say merged, I don't think there was such a necessarily thing. Yeah, that level of source control, those concepts in source control that we have today. But it made it into the game and made it into a lot of other places as it become a common way to do that optimization. And I guess now in more places they either have this what the fuck or a reference to, I guess, this Wikipedia page explaining what this actually is. And I really wonder, like, we Permit as a company, we do a lot of open source, and a lot of our companies are doing open source today. But still, most of the code that is running the world, maybe the foundations are open source, but all the applications are still closed source. And I'm curious to know how many more magic hacks, how many more techniques exist in code that we have today as humanity, but we're not sharing it. And if we did, we'd have maybe we'd be able to speed up AI a lot faster, or do other things in a better way, or maybe just have better ways of just managing our code as well. Maybe techniques for making our code look prettier. Who knows? And I wonder if there are people now in their companies, as they're going about their code base, maybe there's some things that they can find there and maybe decide to share with the world.
Well, now that they have listened and hopefully will listen to this podcast, people will go diving in and trying to find these quirks. Maybe we'll see more come out. Who knows?
Cool. And I think this is a perfect time to move to our next fact. And our next fact belongs to you, Francesco. Take it away.
Yeah, sure. By the way, I really love this format. And so in the past years, I've been traveling a lot. I've been traveling to conferences. When I was invited to this podcast, I was already just back from Los Angeles. So I want to bring a fact that it's more like for in-person events, also because of the COVID. It is related to the fact that I started being more active on social media. So everything is related to this fact, which I think that... so there are these conferences. Like, I would like to discuss as a fact if you think that conferences like in-person events are relevant for developers or not, because probably, I don't know, in the 80s there were less, say, in-person events. Now we're going more into these, or maybe I'm wrong, but I know that now there are more like these events, these conferences, they are a thing. So the fact is more like a question in my case. So do conferences, in your opinion, have an impact on the career of a developer or not? They're just to have fun and have some free food. And I can start. But go.
Yeah, I actually found for myself, once I started attending conferences, that a lot of the talks that engineers come to make are kind of very exclusive content, as I'd like to call it. Of course, they share the general principle in articles and blogs, but when you actually attend an in-person event, you get that special sprinkle of the extra magic that they have and they try and present to you. So the last time I've been at a conference, and I actually sat in, intrigued to listen what these people actually are there to, and the kind of information they're there to share. And I listened to things that, I thought I knew, but it turned out that there is actually a lot of things that I've been introduced to that are just very fascinating and very kind of groundbreaking in some way. So in general, I would say that attending, events where you get to also meet and interact with other developers is super helpful. But again, I'm here to hear your opinions as well.
I think for first point, I think, events are definitely back now after COVID. Not too far back in the year, I went to KubeCon in Amsterdam, and it was a huge event. Like the previous KubeCon, that was still kind of in pandemic times, was pathetic. Like barely people came in. Yeah. But this event was like fully fledged, like to basically the scale that was pre-COVID. And so I think for the first point, physical events are back at least until the next pandemic hits, and I think that's like there's some good in it. In terms of if it's something that would boost a developer's career, I think it really depends on the developer and depends on the event. Not all the events are the same, so I think like going to reInvent, for example, and going to a Node.js convention or going to KubeCon, very, very different. Like reInvent is much more of a party, and KubeCon is a lot more kind of professional in relation to that. Like all of them have a bit of a party aspect to them because you need to draw people in, but it changes between the different conferences. And I think it also depends on what you expect to get out of these conferences. If you're going to find like developer, like Philip mentioned, if you're looking for like developers doing special things or unique things, or maybe special subjects that you want to learn about, you might find that. But that's kind of like finding diamonds in the rough. There will be a lot of garbage topics, and here and there you'll find a couple of talks that will expand your horizons. But I think there's low-hanging fruit. Like if you're a developer looking for a job, these events often have job-seeking opportunities. Like there are boards where the companies running the event are promoting hiring for themselves. A lot of the bigger companies are in the event for hiring. Like Netflix is doing KubeCon not for selling people Spinnaker or selling Netflix subscriptions. They're there to hire engineers. So it's the perfect place to reach out to them because it's the right people with the right mindset, and they're excited to talk to you as an engineer, even if you're not maybe at the right level for them. But you can strike a conversation and start growing the ball for working in that company. So I think as an engineer, if I was looking to work in a specific company or a specific type of company, I'd look at where that company was doing conferences and go talk to them there. And they'll probably be in the right mindset to kind of engage more.
I agree with Or. When I attend conferences, I attend the other way around. He's saying developers to find job. I'm looking for developers who are interesting. And I'd say in-person events are, in some cases good when you get the right set of folks because you can brainstorm and a lot of different ideas actually come from them. Like, if you go to GopherCon or KubeCon or other conferences wherein, you are interested in that area, obviously as Or mentioned, you have to filter out which talks you're going to go to. And you have to basically be mindful of what you're looking for if you're looking for hiring, right? And, get the right mindset people to talk to. And if you get that, then, it's a great conference. Otherwise, there are some conferences which are like party conferences wherein, you go in, you come back, you feel exhausted and you're like, I didn't achieve anything, right? Nothing new. Or there are conferences wherein people are marketing solutions, wherein you are like, I don't want another marketing or sales conference under the grab of developer conference. But in person, after pandemic, what I figured out is when I attend conferences on online or, when you're talking to people online, you don't really have the same kind of connect that you have when you're in person, right? Because, you kind of discuss more, you're more open, you're in there, right? So it's not like you lose your attention, you're checking your mobile phone or, hey, there's an email that came up and I'm going to respond to it. You're there physically and mentally. So I think, in-person events are good, but, I'd still say choose carefully and set your goals before you go to the conference. Yeah.
Of course. I also think, and I think Francesco can agree here with me, is that a lot of these events and conferences serve as an excuse and a meeting ground to meet other people, especially, for example, for us in advocacy. A lot of, for example, YouTubers or a lot of developer advocates, they tend to use these conferences maybe not just to learn, but also just to meet and network together. And I think kind of the networking aspect here is also quite important because then you get a lot of really cool connections and then you can, therefore, chat tech and share your ideas of others. So it's also kind of like a hub for that community to build and to meet fellow folks that are interested in the same thing. But of course, like all of you said, you got to pick the right conference. You can't pick just a random one and go to it because you might be pleasantly surprised that it's not what you want.
Yeah, I think there are also other things that you can get from conferences. Like one of our employees started dating a girl he met in a conference. I don't know how common that is, but it seems to be a plausible thing that you can get, that you can obtain or kind of enjoy from doing that conference. And I think also going to party conferences can also be all right, but you need to come with the right mindset. You shouldn't come with the mindset of, I'll be doing a lot of professional work. You can come with the mindset of, I'll be building a lot of relationships. And I think you need to be the right type of person also, as I said at the beginning. You need to be the right type of developer. If you're a developer that enjoys, like you're a little bit of a extrovert and not too much of an introvert, you can make some great friends, and these can maybe down the road help your career as well.
Isn't conferences also another place to collect a bunch of swag, and a lot of people go there to get that? I swear that's a thing, right?
I don't think anyone goes to conferences for the purpose of swag, but when people get there, it's like they turn into kids. Oh, they're giving free bouncy balls. Oh, I have to get that. oh, there's a coffee machine. Oh, I never had coffee in my life. I have to stand in line here and taste this coffee. Or socks, or like, and people sometimes they even like fight over it. And so, and I think it's kind of silly, but there's something beautiful about it. Like, it enables adults to go back to being kids. And I think, it shows a silly but innocent and beautiful kind of thing that we all have an eternal child within us that just wants some free stuff.
Cool. That's all awesome. And I think they were getting to the point where I think we should get presented with our third fact for this podcast episode. And that fact is by Anand. Take it away.
So my fun fact is code generators are the fastest growing generative AI tools today, and will remain the same for next couple of years. And it all started with, I'd say OpenAI launch, GPT, I'd say 3.5, not even 3. 3 was not even close to where we want. But, inherently, not all the programmers will agree with this, but inherently, if you're a good programmer, you're lazy. You don't want to do the same thing again, right? So all the developers, typically when they code, what they used to do before, generative AI is go search on Google, how do I do a certain thing? Because nobody wants to write bad code, and they want to check how people are doing it, figure out, what's the best way, learn about it, and then code it. But, the main problem was search for something, you get somebody doing something similar, not exactly what you want, and you read it, you try to understand it, you spend time. So if you wanted to write 10 lines of code, you're spending a couple of hours figuring out how do I write it the best way. Now, generative AI, rather than basically searching for and then figuring out how to apply it to your problem, you ask the problem. It has already learned on a bunch of so-called open source, right? Leave it there. I'm not going to go into copyrights and all those things, but you ask a question and you actually get a code for the problem that you have asked. So you're not basically looking at, examples, trying to figure out, okay, he applied it here and this is how it works. And then now I have to write a piece of code. You directly get a code. So now it has simplified, developer's life, wherein rather than actually figuring out how to apply something by searching, you directly get an applied piece of code. That's great. But then the other issue with that is when you're working on something related to the organization that you're working for, they already have a lot amount of code written, right? And generative AI gives you generic information, right? So now you have to take that piece of code, which works pretty nice, but it's generic, and then now figure out how do I make it work in my organization's code, right? Just to give you an example. If I'm basically trying to connect to Google Cloud using authentication service from Google OAuth or whatever, and then trying to perform an operation, right? There might be already a function within my piece of code which authenticates with Google, right? Now, generative AI to generate code, it's going to give me a code with authentication and everything. Now, if I directly take it and place it in my code, I have authentication implemented twice. One which was already existing, the other one, is generated code. You don't want to do that. So now what happens is, although it solves your searching problem, you have another problem. I take this code and now I'm spending time modifying it to make it work the way my organization wants.
Yeah, there are problems.
So it did help you, but then it created a set of issues. Yeah. So now people are kind of looking at, how do I generate the code, but not generic code based on what I've already written, right? And that is where, these tools help, because all these generative AI solutions out there, have kind of short-term memory, right? Wherein, you talk about token limits, the amount of input that you can give, and so on. Now, if you want answers on your code, you need to basically tell AI, this is my authentication function. This is how I do X. This is how I do Y. Knowing all of this, can you generate code for this particular problem that I'm trying to solve, right? Now, the thing is, if your code base is huge, you can't fit in everything into that memory space, right? So you need something which will look at your code based on the question that you're asking, try to figure out all the related functions, classes, methods, documentation which are related to it.
Yeah.
And using that, provide some context to AI and then basically say, how do I generate X? Okay, although it sounds simple, it's tough because, code is not like English document, which is like, I just take few lines. You need to basically take either a full function or at least take the function and summarize it and so on. So in the, crux of it, very complex thing, but everybody needs it. And everybody, from Microsoft to Amazon to Replit, even us, we are providing a solution. We are all trying to, kind of tend to that particular problem. And then the other aspect, beautiful aspect to this is why generative AI is so good is, as the topic of this is command shift left, right? Try to move as much as possible before you actually check in, right? Or do stuff. So now, which is very good for managers, right? Hey, security, we should just shift left, right? Now the developer is like, I have to write this one line of code. I have to figure out what security is, right? Then somebody comes and says, you know what? Privacy is important. We should make sure that, no PII data is stored, right, in the code. Shift left.
Yeah.
Now the developer is like, shit, now I have to basically do a bunch of more things, right? When do I actually write code? So, all of these things that, people are trying to shift left, right? Which, relatively have a structured approach. Like if you're thinking about security, you're going to look at dependencies. You're going to look at are you going to have memory overruns? You're going to look at, are you directly executing something rather than verifying it and stuff? They're predefined, like structured steps. And as you find security issues, people also tell you how to fix them. As those instructions are available, rather than, a developer doing it, generative AI can take the piece of code that you've written, look at this set of rules, modify that code to enforce security, modify that code to enforce privacy. So in general, actually leaving the developer to do what he wants to do and improve their performance.
I have a question because it's interesting that you raised this because I was actually thinking about this a few days ago. And of course, we will see much more developers try to use this generative code feature to either implement some code in their company and so on. But obviously, the code has to understand, a larger context. Now, wouldn't it start being some kind of security vulnerability if you're going to start taking out your application code and putting it into the AI for it to understand? Because from what I read, and I don't know if it's true or not, but this AI is constantly learning based on your input and based on the output. So surely, if you're giving sensitive code as the input to give the generic context of what you're doing to hopefully get the right solution, that surely is a security risk, right? And then if so, how are we going to combat this? Because I'm 100% sure that there is already developers that are doing this, even though they shouldn't. So how do we overcome this? How do we battle this?
Yeah. So there are different approaches provided today. We all look at OpenAI, Google and other APIs which are available. And primarily, if you're using these APIs, not at an enterprise account level, right? By default, it's like, hey, we whatever you're giving us, we are training our model on that. But if you're basically taking an enterprise account or, most of these guys now have provided the mechanics to actually go at the account level and say, do not use my data for training, do not store my data, right? Now, some people may not be even comfortable with that. I'm like, great, you're giving me this option. How do I know? Right? I'm just signing a document, but does that document mean that, all my data is going to be safe, right? A lot of people are apprehensive about it. So now what has happened is there are companies which allow you to actually take open source models like Llama or NeoGPT, deploy it in your environment, right? Yeah. And then train it, right? Other thing that has happened is, if you're looking at Azure or if you're looking at AWS is Bedrock. And Microsoft also allows you to deploy models in your VPC. Okay. What happens is, your training data, like the overall training data, global training data is kind of shared. But the inference engine, which actually takes your input and generates the output, is running within your VPC. Any logs, any data, anything is within your VPC. That's not basically shared with like the common data. And a lot of mechanics, but again, setting that up, knowing about it, and getting it all working, that's work in itself. But there are mechanics to actually do that. Now, if you're using pure play APIs without all of this, then and without checking whether your data is being used for training, then that's a pure security risk. Yeah,
and that's what most people are doing, right? They're using end-to-end solve tools like Copilot and the like, where it's not hosted on their VPC. It's like a big external solution, and they have no idea where things are going. And we've already seen with Copilot, we saw some security incidents. So the Copilot basically reusing tokens that it's seen from other people's code and basically sharing it with other people. They were wrong to put embedded into the code secret tokens in the first place.
Yeah.
But sharing it with other people only exacerbated the issue. I definitely think we'll be seeing a lot more of this. And personally, as an engineer, I like the fact that I can delegate a lot of this annoying work to someone else that doesn't suffer from it as much. Like throwing this on a junior engineer, both with the junior engineer and with the AI, I'd be worried about the results. But with the junior engineer, I'd also be worried about him suffering and not enjoying this and losing his passion for the profession. But another thing that I think we need to worry about here is where the profession or where the skill set of an engineer would balance to be. So it will still need engineers, but there will be a different kind of engineers. And I wonder how much will we gain, how much will we lose. And I actually want to connect this to my fact at the beginning of the episode. So we described an engineer putting in a quick hack that turned out to be something that revolutionized the space. Maybe if that engineer just delegated this to AI, we wouldn't have that sophisticated solution. The AI might not be able to be as creative as that engineer, and maybe we'll be losing something to that effect. And then it's a question of how we find the right balance point, and how do we start thinking of ourselves as engineers as these tools become more and more commonplace.
Yeah. One thing out there is, what I always say whenever using AI tools is don't be dependent on it, because once you get dependent on it, you lose coding skills. At the same point in time, people who have been able to use these generative AI tools have been always good developers. The reason for that being is they have a construct in their mind what they want to do, right? They're using these tools as assistants. That means, okay, I want to do this. Let me check, what are the different ways or suggestions that, I get. They look at the code, but they basically don't, do something like ignore the human common sense, right? They look at the code, they see, hey, the code is decent, it does a bunch of things. So I can use most part of it, but there are certain things that I'm going to go and change, right? I think, it's always going to be a combination of human knowledge plus AI, because, generative AI at the end of the day, even if, people connect it to the web to get recent data, what it is doing is generating information or generating content based on the information that is known. All right. It does hallucinate, and hallucinate is like dreaming, which means it will come up with stuff which doesn't exist. Like, humans do, right? You can discuss ideas and then you come up with something, which is, again, great, but sometimes bad if people are like blindly taking the code and using it. But it's always like, use it, but don't basically completely or 100% depend on it.
For sure. And kind of what I'm thinking we're going to see, because obviously AI will just continue to grow. Now I can see companies like OpenAI kind of growing to the point where we're going to be so dependent on AI and how much it can help us in the future that I can see, for example, OpenAI offering services and offering like an on-prem solution for companies where they can just own the whole of kind of the AI and then train it, like you said, even further.
Yes.
And that would be like a AI as a service or something. God knows what we're going to come up with, but it feels like we're slowly going in that direction and we're becoming more and more dependent on it, which is interesting.
Yeah, and I'd say that, as they say, right, an engineer or an engineer can build a house, right, or bridge. But, you need an architect at the end of the day who's kind of is what it should. So you cannot take humans out of the picture, right?
Yeah.
They can generate anything, but to generate something, it needs to know what to generate, how to generate it, what are the constraints, right? This is where humans come in. And then the other thing is verification. We are not at a level that, I can, in some cases for simple things, I can directly take the output and use it. But in most of the cases, having man in the middle or humans is important. So as people say, it's going to take away a job. I'm like, no, it's going to make you efficient, but it's not going to take your job away. At least, at the stage it is right now.
I think you can say it's gonna take your job and just give you a job that is similar to the one you had now, is kind of different with more AI colleagues that you need to play with.
Our job was like Iron Man.
I'm old enough that in the 90s they were saying Google will steal your job, like it was the 90s. But now it sounds funny, but like I've been hearing this for 30 years.
Google stole my job. I used to work as someone that you call for a list of websites. You give me a topic and I'll tell you which URLs to actually input into your browser. And I made millions, and then I lost it all to Google. Initially to Alta Vista and then to Google.
But we're in a better place right now, right? And more happy.
I've recovered from the trauma.
Would not be in the podcast today. So
without it, yeah. Before that, by the way, I worked as a DNS server. People would give me host names, and I'd give them IP addresses. That also didn't stick for long.
Sounds exhausting.
Pretty much. So I think now would be a good time to move to our last fact, and that one belongs to Philip. Philip, give us your best.
So my fact for today and for this episode is that technological singularity could lead to an end of the human era. Now, this is kind of interesting, and it relates to the third point and to the first point that we've made. It's also based on AI. And there is a whole concept of singularity that exists. And essentially what that is the idea of rapid technological change. Now, what does that mean? Well, there was a mathematician once. His name was Vernor Vinge. And essentially what he believed is that this singularity concept would represent and end the whole of human era. Now, there is a very famous futurist and advocate for the singularity concept. His name is Kurzweil. And essentially, he made a prediction that by 2045, singularity will occur. Well, what does that mean? Well, he believes that by that time, technological progression will be so rapid that we as humans will in some way have to augment ourselves to be able to keep up with the technology and how fast it advances. So my question is, would you augment your brain with technology if it meant you were able to keep up with the pace of the super intelligent AI? Or would you draw the line at some point?
yes, so in 2045 I'll be 60, and I'll probably just go to the beach and relax. I have a good house there, so probably this is the future that it's really for me. But maybe, now these jokes aside, but let's say coming back to some more serious thing, we notice this trend that like technology is always going faster. Like we noticed it like in 6 months, in 1 year, we can change the whole ecosystem again and start over again. So I think that I don't think that it's easy to decide now in this podcast what will happen in the future. But I think that the adaptability is one of the best skills that we might have today. I think it's even more important than just coding or a very deep knowledge of a single language. So yes, it's a hard time because we are more or less like we were like 5,000 years ago as humans, even 10,000, I think. So very similar. And so I don't know if we can keep it up, but it's something that I think that it will happen still a bit gradually. So like we have been doing it so far, like. So I want to hope that we still have hope. So I don't think this is one of the biggest risks for humanity. I think there are way worse risks for humanity rather than this improvement in tech that I hope that will always be used for at least something good, like just coding faster and not something bad for humanity itself. So this is my thought, but as I said, probably it will not be my biggest problem.
So I think, first of all, Francesco kind of mentioned that we've become accustomed to the fact that we're constantly seeing advances in technology. But for most of human history, that wasn't the situation. If you go to the Middle Ages, if you go to the Bronze Age, if you go to the hunter-gatherer times, if you, as a person, if you look back at your ancestors, several generations before, you'd see the same style of life. Things weren't changed, or they changed very slowly. So in the end of the day, we're looking here at an exponential graph that is accelerating. We can see the curve. And initially, the changes as the curve starts are minuscule. So it feels like it's not changing. But then it picks up, and it picks up very, very fast. The compounding effect is the kind of the scary thing here, the rate of the change, and not the change itself, not the speed of the change, but the acceleration. And I think to your question, Philip, I don't think it's not actually a question for us, because no one's going to ask us. Like, that's also what happened in previous ages. And here I'm kind of ripping off from Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. He talks there about the agricultural revolution. In the agricultural revolution, humans decided to settle down and start growing some crop, rice or wheat. And we talk about domesticating wheat, for example. But he asks, who was domesticated? The wheat continued to live. So domesticate comes from domus, which means house. So before, the humans and the wheat lived in the forest outside, and the person that moved into the house was the human. So the human was domesticated, not the wheat. And also, at no point in time did any human stop and think, do we want to do this? Do we want to move into like cities and houses? No, it just happened. And and you can't go back. Going back means killing people, because you need the technology to support growth. And once you have that growth in place, it continues. And stopping that growth means killing the additional children that you had, because now you have no way of feeding them. So it's not really a question for us. It's a question for maybe the AI, but probably a more bigger emergent force that we can't even understand ourselves. But if I have to answer the question, my answer is goddamn yes. I want to merge with technology and have all the awesomeness of a deity. Sure, sign me in.
Yeah. And I kind of like, I basically, also give an example similar to our, when I was basically just out of college, mobile phones were new. If you joined a company, you got a mobile phone, right? Or you had to rush to a landline to make a call, right? Now, everybody actually owns a cell phone. And my parents actually didn't know how to use a cell phone, and they were around 50, 60 years old. Now they can chat, it's like anytime you have to call them, I was like, come on, let's do WhatsApp. So, if you kind of see they've morphed into they were people who used to go out. They even today meet, their friends and so on. They're more in-person people. But, they have over a period of time started to use technology in ways that would help them. So, as the technology grows, augmentation will become a necessity rather than an option.
Yeah.
Right? Because think about it, today we have this, AR glasses, right? Which is you can basically virtually sit anywhere, get information about the things that you're seeing, connect with people. It's I'd say a better cell phone, but in front of your eyes. But, things will change in the future. And if everybody, even if 20% people are using it and they are basically being more productive, have more information, can do more things, then people who don't have it would want to have it. So, that change is going to happen.
Yeah.
But, and when we talk about augmentation, it's both I'd say AI augmentation and physical augmentation, right? We are already doing space mining one way or the other by sending space probes and trying to, dig up asteroids. There's a lot of material out there. We are basically eating up Earth in one fashion or the other by mining. So, you're going to kind of look outside. And, we are initially going to start with robots. You can't send humans everywhere, right? You don't know. They're dangerous places. You need something to control it, right? So all of these advancements would lead to some form of augmentation, right? We're talking about AI augmentation or chip, right? Inside the brain at some point in time versus, using armors, to actually, rather than say fighting and stuff, even physically disabled people who are not able to walk, if, you have a armor,
Exoskeleton.
yeah. So it's going to happen. But, I'd say I am worried about the timeline. I think it might take a bit longer than that, right? I worry about being 100% dependent on it.
Right.
We need to make sure that we don't lose humanity, right? Yeah.
And I think as we kind of talk about dependency, to wrap up this podcast, I'd like to kind of leave a question for all the listeners. And the question is, what would happen if we suddenly, rather than advancing in technology, we would take it all away? So that's something that you can think about and how people would start to behave. Anand and Francesco, thank you so much for joining us in this podcast. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure speaking to you. And to all the audience, we'll see you in the next episode. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
I think this is the perfect time to wrap up the show. If you liked this podcast, tell your friends about it. If you didn't like it, tell your enemies about it. Hey, it's Philip. There is a few little things I quickly want to add. If you enjoy Command-Shift-Left, make sure you leave us a rating on the platform you are streaming from. We will be eternally grateful. If you are not doing so already, make sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn by typing in @JustShiftLeft, all one word, for any updates and new episode releases. Finally, this podcast is fully supported by Permit.io, of which me and Or work at, so make sure you go ahead and check out Permit if you need a simple solution to implement authorization. That's all, and we will see you in the next episode.